February in Ridgeline, Montana. The thermometer outside Creighton's hardware read 14 degrees, and the morning sun hadn't yet cleared the limestone ridge that hemmed in the small town like a stone jaw. Cole Mercer pushed through the glass door, Bishop at his side, the German shepherd's breath clouding in the dry cold of the store's entrance. They'd come for PVC pipe, 3-inch diameter, 20 feet of it, and grow lights, the kind with the full spectrum that cost more than a decent rifle scope. Dale Creighton stood behind the counter with 2 other men, all 3 in Carhartt jackets and feed store hats. They were talking about the Hanson Ranch's cattle, about the price of hay, the usual February conversation. Dale looked up when the door chime rang, his thick moustache lifting into a smile that wasn't quite kind. "Well, hell," he said. "If it isn't the cave farmer," Cole didn't answer. He pulled a shopping list from his jacket pocket and headed toward the lumber section. Bishop's nails clicked on the concrete floor, steady and even, like a metronome set to purpose. "You're going to grow tomatoes inside a mountain?" Dale's voice carried across the store, designed too. "What are you going to do, set up LED lights down there like some kind of underground lettuce factory?" The other men laughed. Not mean exactly, just the laughter of people who'd never had reason to think bigger than the valley they could see from their porch. Cole found the PVC, began stacking it. The pipe was heavy, substantial, real. He pulled 6 lengths from the rack. At the lighting section, he selected 2 commercial-grade LED panels, 2,000 lumens each, efficient, durable. The kind that would outlast the assumptions of small towns. He paid. Cash, counted out slow. Dale tried to engage him again, something about the cave being a weird damn project, but Cole just nodded, the way you do when someone's talking and you've already decided not to hear them. He and Bishop left with the supplies, the door chime ringing behind them like a bell of dismissal. Outside, the cold hit clean. Cole loaded the truck bed, securing everything with a rope he kept behind the seat. Bishop jumped in after, and Cole took a moment before starting the engine, his hand on the steering wheel, looking back at Creighton's hardware through the windshield. The men were visible through the glass, already moving on to the next subject, already forgetting. Cole had learned something in 23 years, in the Navy, in Afghanistan, in the wreckage of his marriage that waited for him when he came home, that most people never did learn. The mocking comes from a place of comfort. People who mock are people who've never had to prepare, never had to plan for the moment when comfort ends. He turned the key. The truck started. He drove out of town. Cole Mercer had been a Navy SEAL for 15 years. Not a soft veteran, not a motivational speaker or a consultant. He was a breacher and a demolition specialist with SEAL Team 5, which meant he was trained to get into places no reasonable person should go, and then he was trained to break things with methodical precision. 2 tours in Afghanistan, both of them in the valleys, both of them running operations where the margin between plan and disaster was sometimes measured in seconds. He was good at what he did. Exceptionally good. The kind of good that got you advance recommendations and command attention, and a reputation that followed you through briefing rooms like a shadow. But good at breaking things wasn't the same as good at living in a world that never broke. That's what the second tour taught him. The first tour, he was still young enough to believe that discipline and training would translate to peace. By the second tour, he'd figured out that peace wasn't a reward you earned. It was something you either had or you didn't, and wanting it didn't change the equation. His wife, Jennifer, had been kind when he came back from the second tour. Kind and distant, the way people are kind to someone who's already left. She'd left him a note on the kitchen counter in their Virginia Beach house. "I can't wait for someone who isn't waiting to leave again." The house was already selling. She'd had the realtor out while he was still in the decompression briefing. The drive west took him through 4 states in 11 days. Somewhere in Oklahoma, he stopped at a gas station for coffee, and that's where he found Bishop. The dog was outside, behind the station, ribs visible through a matted dark coat. One ear folded back like it had been that way too long and forgotten how to straighten. He was tied to a stake with a piece of clothesline. No water visible, no shelter from the wind that was picking up for an evening storm. The dog was maybe 4 years old, maybe more. It was hard to tell with the condition he was in. Cole bought a sandwich, walked to the back, and sat down on his heels about 6 feet from the stake. He didn't reach for the dog, he just opened the sandwich and ate it slowly, letting the dog watch him. Bishop, because somehow Cole knew that was his name, the way you know things that have been decided for you, began to circle the stake. "You're a beautiful dog," Cole said quietly. "Someone hurt you, that's clear, but I'm not going to hurt you. Not today. Maybe not ever." It took an hour for Bishop to eat the second half of the sandwich from Cole's hand. It took another 30 minutes for Cole to cut the clothesline. The dog didn't follow him at first. Cole walked to the truck, started it, didn't close the passenger door. After 2 minutes, Bishop jumped in, and Cole closed the door as gently as it deserved. They drove until dark, and Cole paid cash for a motel room that didn't ask questions about the dog. That night, for the first time in months, Cole slept without the tactical awareness that had become his default, the part of him always listening, always waiting. Bishop slept with his head on Cole's chest, and Cole's hand never left the dog's back. The paranoia that the town mocked wasn't paranoia. It was something deeper and older than any diagnostic category. It was the knowledge that the world had seasons and winter was one of them, and winter could kill you if you weren't ready. The military had formalized it into doctrine. Always have a contingency. Always plan for the worst-case scenario. That way, anything better than the worst case was acceptable. That way, you lived. Most people planned for forgetting. Cole planned for remembering. 40 acres of land in the Montana mountains, steep and rocky, covered in a skeleton of dead pine and sage. The realtor who sold it to him had called it goat pasture with potential complications. Cole had purchased it for $8,000 at a county auction after reading the geological survey online. The survey mentioned limestone formations, a naturally elevated ridge, a creek system, and something that made his breath shift: evidence of cave systems. Bishop found the main entrance in early October, 2 weeks after they'd taken possession. It was a gap in the rock face, narrow, easy to miss if you weren't looking. 30 feet above the creek, hidden behind a thicket of the dead pine. The dog had been sniffing along a game trail when something caught his attention. He moved straight toward the rock face, ears forward, and Cole followed him into the gap. The cave opened up after 20 feet of scrambling. Not a huge opening, but substantial, 40 feet wide at the mouth, tapering as it went back. The floor was packed limestone, dry to the touch, and when Cole pulled out his thermometer, he always carried a thermometer, it read 54 degrees Fahrenheit, steady, stable, the kind of temperature that didn't change. It took him 3 weeks to work out the full concept. He spent hours in the cave, just sitting, learning how the air moved, where the seepage points were, how the echoes worked. A limestone cave system maintained its temperature year-round because the rock was an insulator, because the Earth's geothermal gradient kept steady warmth deep below the frost line. It was nature's perfect growing environment. The plan came together in late October, just written in a notebook, sketched with precise drawings he'd learned to do in demolitions briefings. Underground greenhouse farm using the cave's natural thermal stability. LED grow lights powered by a small hydro turbine installed in the creek below. Simple mechanism, pull rotational energy from moving water, convert to electricity. Terraced growing beds carved into the natural limestone shelves inside the cave. Water channeled from a natural spring deeper in the cave system, which he could pump with gravity logic. A root cellar section for food preservation. Supplemental heating from a wood-burning rocket stove vented through a natural chimney crack in the back of the cave. It was a plan built on the principle that mattered most: redundancy, multiple water sources, multiple power sources, multiple temperature controls. The kind of planning that paranoid men did, the kind that small towns laughed at. The first crisis came in early October, just as the first real cold moved in. Cole had built a temporary shelter outside the cave entrance, a frame of saplings with tarps, insulated with pine boughs and straw. The shelter was meant to be temporary, just a few months while he got the cave ready. But that October night, a freak ice storm moved in without warning, the kind that dropped an inch of ice on every surface and weighted everything beyond capacity. Cole was inside the temporary shelter, working on modifying a hydraulic pump he'd salvaged from an old mining operation when the weight hit. The ice accumulated on the tarp, accumulated in silence, the kind of slow catastrophe that doesn't announce itself until it's too late. The roof support gave way at 2 a.m., a sudden collapse, and a cross brace came down on Cole's left leg, pinning him. The pain was clear and objective. He assessed it methodically: probable fibular fracture, soft tissue damage, possible ligament impact. The temperature in the shelter was dropping. He was conscious, but the cold was a problem. He needed to get out. But Bishop got him out. The dog was outside when the shelter collapsed, alert to the danger the way dogs are, the way most animals are. When the roof came down, Bishop started digging through the tarps and insulation, barking in short, sharp bursts. Cole heard him and fought the cold fog that was starting to roll in at the edges of his thinking. He reached up, grabbed Bishop's collar, and the dog pulled, braced against the weight. It took 15 minutes to drag himself free. Bishop never stopped, never panicked, just kept his feet planted and pulled. When Cole was finally clear, the dog spun around and grabbed a wool blanket. Where the blanket came from, Cole never figured out. Bishop must have found it somewhere and dragged it back to him. Cole crawled to the cave entrance that night, dragging his injured leg, his hands bleeding from rope work that had been too aggressive. Bishop stayed with him the entire way, and when Cole stopped, when the pain made him stop, the dog lay down against him, warmth and pressure and the basic presence of something that wasn't the cold. He moved into the cave permanently that night. Earl Briggs was 74 years old, a retired mining engineer who'd spent 30 years managing ventilation systems for the Elkhorn copper mines, which sat about 20 miles north of Cole's property. Earl had a limp from a tunnel collapse in 1987, back when he was still just crew chief, when the calculation he made about structural load turned out to be 5 tons off. He'd spent 3 days in the dark waiting for rescue, and the experience had taught him that most engineering problems were just delayed disaster, and planning was the only prayer that mattered. He saw Cole one afternoon in April, moving limestone rubble out of the cave mouth, wheelbarrow load after wheelbarrow load. Cole was working without a shirt despite the April cold. He was past that kind of discomfort, and Earl recognised the scar tissue, the way the body held itself when it had been through military-grade punishment. Earl walked up the ridge without calling ahead, carrying a 6-pack of beer and a headlamp. He was wearing his battered canvas hat, the one that had been dirty since 1992, and his boots were good, the kind of boots you buy once and then own. "You're gonna need better airflow if you're putting lights in there," Earl said, not as a greeting, just as a statement of fact. Cole looked at him, assessed him the way he'd been trained to assess threats, and saw something else. A man who'd built things that stayed built, who'd worked in the dark, who understood redundancy and structural load. "Yeah," Cole said, "I know." Earl opened a beer. "Then let's talk about it." They didn't become friends, not the way most people use that word, but they became something more useful. Partners in the kind of work that doesn't care about friendship. Earl brought his engineering expertise. Cole brought his capacity for precision and his willingness to work until a thing was done. Bishop brought his absolute certainty that both of them were worth keeping alive. The build took 6 months. Earl designed the ventilation system using principles he'd learned engineering mine shafts. Create pressure differentials that would move air through the cave, prevent carbon dioxide buildup, manage humidity. They installed intake and exhaust vents, positioned them at opposing ends of the cave system, used the natural gradient to create steady circulation. The terraced beds were constructed from limestone blocks they pulled from the cave floor, creating growing surfaces at different heights. Cole had salvaged an old car alternator, and with Earl's help they built a hydro turbine from spare parts. A wheel they machined, a copper wire they'd bought at salvage, bearings they repurposed. The turbine went into the creek below, powered by gravity and water flow, simple and elegant. The rocket stove came from salvaged steel pipe, a design Cole had memorized from a survival manual. It burned wood with remarkable efficiency, heating primarily through radiation, vented through a fissure in the cave roof that led to the surface. Water came from the natural spring. They tested it. It was pure enough, pumped through PVC pipe that Earl had helped route through the cave. The first seedlings went in November. Simple vegetables, lettuce, kale, spinach, radishes. Cole had ordered the seeds online, paying cash at a UPS store. He'd also bought root systems, fertilizer, the kind of basic hydroponics infrastructure that turned Earth into production. By mid-December, Rory, 60 days after the first planting, they harvested lettuce, crisp, green, impossible and real. Cole held it in his hands and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for 2 years. Bishop watched the lettuce with interest. He was waiting for carrots, which Cole grew in a separate section, which he fed to the dog once a week as a supplement to his diet. By the end of January, the cave had 200 square feet of growing beds producing lettuce, kale, radishes, carrots, fresh herbs, basil, cilantro, parsley. The root cellar section held 300 pounds of preserved vegetables, stored in conditions so perfect that food kept for months. The temperature never wavered above 58 degrees or below 52. Humidity stayed between 40 and 60%. Yet every system worked because every system had been designed with the assumption that it might be the only system that mattered. The town noticed in early December. A child from the Henderson Ranch, one of the smaller properties that bordered Cole's land, saw him carrying a basket of fresh greens down the ridge road. It was December. There was snow on the ground. Lettuce was not something that existed in December in Ridgeline. The story spread the way small-town stories spread, through the feed store, through the church, through the bank, where people gathered and repeated impossible things until they became real. Cole Mercer is growing salad inside a mountain. Disbelief at first, then curiosity. A few families drove up the ridge road in mid-January, parking where the paved road ended, making the climb to the cave entrance. Cole didn't invite them in, but he didn't refuse them either. He just opened the entrance a little wider, let people see the glow of the lights, the green of the plants, the impossible stability of it all. Then January turned brutal. The polar vortex reached Montana on the 15th, dropping from Canada like a gate opening to absolute cold. Within 48 hours, the temperature hit 42 degrees below zero, the kind of cold that had personality, that had intent. The blizzard came along with it, 4 feet of snow in 36 hours, power lines snapped under the weight like dry wood, natural gas pipelines in the county experienced pressure loss that made delivery impossible. Ridgeline lost power on the morning of the 18th. 11 days without electricity. 11 days of freezing. The grocery store's freezers thawed within 8 hours. Livestock in the surrounding ranches began dying. Inside homes, people burned furniture because firewood had run out. Mrs. Henderson called the emergency line at 3 a.m. because her children wouldn't stop shaking, and dispatch could only tell her to seek shelter in a town where all shelter was 40 degrees below zero. By day 3, people had begun to understand that something fundamental had changed. This wasn't a power outage with an estimated time of restoration. This was failure of the systems that civilization had built. On day 4, the first family came to the cave. It was the Hendersons, John and Sarah, and their 2 children, Daniel and Ellie, pulling up the ridge road in a truck with chains on the tires, desperation in the way they moved. John didn't knock. He just appeared at the cave entrance and said, "I've got kids." That was all that needed to be said. Cole opened the entrance wider. The Hendersons saw the lights, the plants, the heat radiating from the rocket stove, the basic setup that made survival possible. Sarah Henderson started crying. Just tears, not sound, just the physical release of fear. By day 5, there were 16 people in the cave. The Walshes came, Dan and his wife, Tom and his pregnant wife, because a friend had mentioned it, had said, "There's warmth up there, there's light, there's food." Dale Creighton came alone, frost thick on his moustache, and when he saw Cole, he couldn't hold his gaze. The man had laughed about the cave farm. Now the cave farm was the only thing saving his life. Cole organized it with military precision. He assigned sleeping areas, the deeper sections of the cave where the temperature was most stable. He set up cooking areas, rotation systems for who maintained the stove, who managed the water systems, who tended the plants. The Hendersons' children helped Bishop with his rounds. The dog had assumed the role of morale officer, moving between family groups, checking on people with the seriousness of a trained rescue dog. More people arrived over the next 3 days. By day 6, there were 34 people in the cave. By day 7, there were 47, nearly 2% of the entire town of Ridgeline. Families, elderly people, a pregnant woman and her husband, a diabetic man who needed to manage his insulin carefully, a woman with a heart condition. Cole made vegetable soup from the cave-grown food, kale, carrots, radishes, herbs. He'd been rationing carefully, but something shifted when the first person arrived. Rationing was a calculation for surviving alone. Surviving with others was something different. It was generosity as a discipline. On day 7, during the cold snap's worst night, temperature dropping to 38 below, Mary Olson hadn't been heard from. Mary was 82, had lived alone at the end of Powder Creek Road for 37 years, since her husband died. Independent, hard-headed, the kind of woman who saw asking for help as a form of personal failure. She hadn't come to the cave. No one had thought to check on her until Tom Walsh remembered her at 11 p.m., mentioned it to Cole, and watched Cole's face shift. "She's alone," Tom said. Cole pulled on his field jacket, the one that had been with him through 2 deployments and a marriage and a collapse. He looked at Bishop, and the dog knew without being told. This was the moment for which they'd been preparing since the gas station in Oklahoma. The walk from the cave to Powder Creek Road was roughly a mile, but not a straight-line mile. It was elevation, forest, and wind that had turned the air into something with mass, something that tried to stop you. Cole had a rope, a pack with basic medical supplies, a headlamp. Bishop moved ahead, finding the packed-down game trail, the place where smaller animals had made their movement, and in winter, game trails were the only path that snow hadn't completely obliterated. 40 minutes in, the wind picked up in a way that made the tree line blur. Wind chill was 55 below. Cole couldn't feel his face. He couldn't feel his hands inside the gloves. What he could feel was purpose, the same clarity he'd felt before a breach, before a demolition, the sense that his job was simply to execute the next step. Bishop led him to Mary Olson's cabin through hip-deep snow, the dog moving with absolute certainty, not pausing, not second-guessing. The cabin was dark. The door was unlocked. Mary was inside in a wooden chair beside a stove that had been cold for hours. She was conscious but hypothermic, the way hypothermic means you've given up, the way the body stops fighting. Her core temperature was probably 90 degrees. She had maybe minutes before the shutdown became irreversible. Cole didn't explain anything. He wrapped his jacket around her, his only jacket, the one that had kept him warm since before she was even sick, and he picked her up. Shuss, and he turned to follow the way Bishop had come. The walk back was slower. Mary's weight was real. The cold was personal. Bishop stayed ahead, but not too far ahead. Enough to show the path, not enough to disappear. Cole kept moving. His training had taught him that body was just machinery, that if you didn't acknowledge pain, it wasn't real. This wasn't pain. This was the physical logistics of keeping a person alive. 90 minutes to the cave. He came through the entrance and into the circle of light and heat, carrying an 82-year-old woman in his arms, and people moved without needing to be told. Sarah Henderson had some medical training. She got Mary to the warmest section, started warming her slowly with blankets, checking her vital signs, the way you bring a person back. So Cole sat in the entrance of the cave for an hour after, not moving, just breathing, the sweat on his body beginning to freeze before he made himself get up and change clothes. By day 12, the power returned to Ridgeline. The National Guard reached the town that morning, assessing damage, checking on residents. The commander's name was Captain Morrison, and when he found out that 47 people had sheltered in an underground cave system during a 38 below blizzard, he came directly to the cave with his team. What he found was organised, clean, functional. Plants growing, food being carefully rationed, not one case of frostbite, not one person with worsening health conditions. A pregnant woman who was, if anything, calmer than she'd been before. An 82-year-old woman who was stable and warm, medicated, recovering well. "Who engineered this shelter?" Captain Morrison asked Cole directly. Cole thought about Earl, about the principles that had been applied, about the systems within systems. He thought about Bishop finding the cave entrance, about things that couldn't be engineered, just found. "My dog found it," Cole said. The commander visited the hardware store in Ridgeline on the afternoon of the 14th. Dale Creighton was restocking shelves, moving carefully in the cold store where heat was still being managed carefully. When he saw Morrison approach with Cole, he knew. "I was wrong about you," Dale said to Cole, not to the commander, to Cole directly. "About the cave, about the whole thing, I was wrong." Cole nodded. It was the kind of apology that came from a place of genuine reckoning. "Pipes $3.50 a length?" Cole asked, looking at the inventory. "On the house," Dale said. "All of it." By spring, the County Emergency Management Office had officially designated Cole's Cave as a secondary shelter. Earl's ventilation design had been submitted to a regional engineering journal and was being considered for publication. 3 other families in the area were conducting geological surveys on their own properties, looking for cave systems, applying the principles that had worked for Cole. Cole began teaching a community resilience class at the Ridgeline Community Centre starting in April. How to assess land for shelter, how to plan for power loss, how to build redundancy into the basic systems of living. The class filled to 60 people on the first night. Bishop became the town mascot. Children brought him treats. The local elementary school asked if he could visit for a presentation about survival and loyalty. Cole always said no, but gently. Bishop wasn't a show dog. He was what he'd always been, a dog who showed up. What the cave had taught Cole, what the winter had proven, was something that military training had only whispered about. Building something permanent is harder than destroying something temporary. Destruction is a matter of correctly applied force. But creation, real creation, the kind that keeps people alive through impossible cold, requires patience and precision and a willingness to be called crazy by people who still have the luxury of that opinion. Bishop lay beside him on a flat rock above the cave entrance one evening in May when the valley was filling with spring light, low when the snow had pulled back to the highest elevations. Cole's hand rested on the dog's back, and he felt the warmth that radiated from him, the warmth of a body that had learned to trust, that had learned that showing up was its own kind of courage. "We did it, Bishop," Cole said quietly, "not because we were better, because we prepared." The dog's ears twitched, alert to nothing, peaceful in the evening light. Below them, in the town of Ridgeline, people were beginning to prepare too. The lesson had been learned in the way that only emergency teaches, that the man the town had mocked might have been seeing something they couldn't see. That paranoia might just be another word for clarity, that a cave in the Montana mountains tended by a man and a dog could be the difference between survival and disaster. Cole stayed quiet as the light deepened. Some truths didn't need to be said, they just needed to be seen. Still standing. Paws shows us that preparation isn't paranoia, it's wisdom. If you're building your own resilience plan, subscribe to Still Standing Paws for stories of real survival, real loyalty, and the incredible bond between humans and dogs.